We're back with Season 6, Episode 6, No Second Prances, which I'm guessing is a slightly controversial episode because y'all have been talking about it in chat the entire time while I've been watching it. This is the episode in which Starlight is introduced to someone who you haven't seen since, I think, Season 2 at this point. Trixie, the great and powerful. And the two actually hit it off reasonably well, and then Twilight's an idiot, and then the episode progresses. This is a hard one to talk about, so let's kind of go through this sequentially, shall we? Once again, this is for the second time today, Starlight, the intro, the very beginning, the hook, is a quick showcasing of the general theme and motif of what's going on in the rest of the episode. And one of the motifs. In this case, it is Starlight not getting the point. Now, I'm explaining this wrong, so I decided to come up with an analogy, and I prepped one for this. I want you to imagine for a moment that you exist in Star Trek. Okay, congratulations. You're on the Enterprise. And you're eaten by an amoeba to prove that the situation is serious. Now imagine you're on Earth, which works a little bit better. You have two choices to get some tomatoes. You can go to the replicator and say, "Tomatoes, please." Or you can spend the time and effort to till the soil and grow them and water them periodically over the time in order to work the earth and come up with your own homegrown tomatoes. Now, if this analogy isn't getting it across already, there is, in many situations, a value in the path to the goal, not the goal itself. Starlight tends to focus entirely on the goal. This has actually already come up, and will come up in the future too, where all she's thinking about is the end point. To relate this to speedrunning once again, she usually tends to think of things in terms of, let's get to the finish line regardless of what is required to get to the finish line. You know, she tends to any percent things. And while that's fine for certain things, there are plenty of situations where that doesn't work, and this will, like I said, come up again in the future. Because she just doesn't get it. She legitimately doesn't understand. And I used that analogy with the... Yeah, Twilight's definitely a Tazzer. I used that analogy with the gardening thing because, again, if you want some tomatoes, going out and growing your own just seems stupid. Why would you do that? When I could just hit a few buttons and here's your tomatoes. But anybody who's actually done gardening or is interested in that could tell you of the value and enjoyment of just having that time to degauze. I know 3 people, personally, I just thought of a third one, who actually have taken up gardening as a personal hobby, not because they really particularly want the peppers or the spices or the tomatoes or whatever they're growing. That's kind of a side benefit. It's a way to, after work, for example, you know, you get home from work and it's like, oh, and you just need a bit to degauze before you can process anything else, right? You have to decompress. So you go out there, you work the soil a little bit, water it, work that thing. And that's exactly my point, is because that is the point. The point is not the tomatoes. The point is the gardening. So she fails to understand this completely, naturally, which then leads to, well, a couple other points I'll talk about in just a second, because I want to maintain this thread of conversation. Her lack of understanding leads to her just making a cake, which... well, doesn't really get across the point and naturally leads to some irritation. So then she's like, oh, well, okay, I'll just go ahead and chat with Big Mac. And this is probably when she's at her most personally villainous in this episode, where she forces Big Mac to talk because, I mean, he doesn't talk much. But it's okay. If I make it so that you talk a bunch, then we could be friends. Notice there's no evil here. We could argue this, but I would say there's no malice, there's no malevolence. This is, again, just her not getting it. Her just completely not understanding the point. And so she's like, oh, well, I need to be friends with someone. I want to be friends with you. And you don't talk a bit, but I can fix that. Hey, now you can talk a bunch. Oh, wait, that's bad? Okay, maybe I'll go fix it. And again, this is why I used that replicator analogy earlier. Because a replicator is just boop, tomatoes. Fine for certain circumstances. Sometimes you really just need some tomatoes. But you can see how that only applies in some cases, in some circumstances. Anywho, now I skipped over a couple of beats there. Starlight makes a comment about how she's going to enslave people. Obviously, this is part of a recap thing to make sure that viewers are remembering who Starlight is, because she hasn't been present in the last several episodes. But more to the point, I feel like this really helps to emphasize more of Starlight's character arc that she's already been on and will continue to be on for a while now. I noticed that act. Because this isn't the first or last time that she is obviously really bothered by this. And yeah, it's deflective humor, exactly. And as I've already pointed out, she still not only feels guilty, but she's never even been properly punished for what she does, which clearly makes her feel even worse, having been forgiven so easily, and that is part of her character arc throughout this season. And I think in Season 7 as well. So, with that being stated, you know how they take that picture and they send it to Celestia? I never actually noticed this before, but in that picture, Starlight is there and she looks awkward and uncomfortable and out of place. Nice touch. Shoo, she tries to make friends. So she does the two obvious ones with Mrs. Cake and Big Mac, but then she tries to get an outfit, which obviously will take too long, so that's just kind of whatever. And then we have the Spitfire joke. Ha ha, by the way, episode. Never caught that before. Rainbow just kind of drops her for some reason. And they don't even address why she doesn't try to make friends with any of the animals. I guess that just doesn't count or whatever. This is when we notice that Angel takes a liking to Starlight, which probably says something about both of them. But then this leads to a moment, and I've been thinking about this. Several people have said Twilight has anxiety, but I actually pushed against it. I think she had other issues. Starlight, by contrast, much more clearly has something that I would clearly call just straight-up anxiety. Because she's got that seesaw thing. That's what I call it. Other people call it something else, like the circle that just won't stop spinning, you know? She starts spiraling out of control, and the moment she does, she tends to spiral much harder. She does this even when she's being a villain. But she especially does this here. And yeah, this is the stop stressing. Stop stressing! Because she's just wildly falling out of control because she's not handling it. And of course she's not handling it. I hate to keep empathizing with Starlight, but hear me out for a second. You already don't feel particularly loved or wanted. I bet that's a feeling that everyone has felt at least at one point in their lives, validly or otherwise. So pull that feeling. Remember that feeling for a second. Now actually remember. Now put yourself in that headspace and think that you did something horrible, which you feel bad about. Now let's imagine that in so feeling bad about it, everyone just kind of lets it go. But you haven't. There's been no closure. So it's just sitting there in the back of your mind constantly. Now imagine that you think you're getting better. You feel like you're just finally starting to get better. But then you're tasked to prove it. And you fail. And you fail when it's easy. She says it herself, I can't get a friend in Ponyville. And Ponyville is literally renowned for being the friendship central, right? Now, she probably could get a friend here. But you can see how this kind of starts to crush her emotionally and mentally. Because she feels like such a flagrant and utter failure. Arguably because she is. So, she freaks out completely. This then leads to her seeing Bulk Biceps, who's still working at the spa, by the way. I counted 3 separate continuity things in this, not counting Trixie. If we're counting Trixie, we're up to 4 continuity counters in this one. Bulk Biceps is one of them. So she goes to the spa. Oh, thank God. How many of you, the first time you saw this, recognized Trixie without before she revealed herself? Because they actually do a lot to disguise who it is. All you have is the voice to go off of. Now, I'll admit it, I actually recognized her. But remember, I saw these episodes more or less back to back because I was watching them with my niece, so I caught the voice. But I would have... They did a decent job of disguising who it is. Remember, the last time she showed up was in Season 2. It's been a while. So, Trixie, it's Trixie! Da-da-da-da! Now... The humble and penitent Trixie's apology tour. Lol. Oh, sorry, Season 3, my bad. So far, I'm completely with this episode. This then leads to Twilight being about Trixie. First problem. You should just learn to give your student room and let them make their own decisions. Now, on the one hand, that is decent advice and actually follows through with the ideas of how this has been presented. But on the other hand, she was already told this back in the Crystalling, Part 2. Spike told her that. In fact, she almost quotes Spike word for word at the end of this episode, which is not a good showing there. I know this show has a bit of problem with Aesop amnesia, but this is another example of that. Second problem. She has issues with Trixie, but not Starlight, who is... You know, I like Starlight as a character, but Starlight has done demonstrably, categorically worse things than Trixie did. What Trixie did was under the influence of mind control. Now, granted, she started that path, but then there was a chukunk, and then she finished that path by apologizing. By contrast, Starlight just did what she did because of the emotional mental trauma thing, which is valid, but nevertheless is something she deliberately and willingly did. Now, Raskor says Trixie is more personal for Twilight. I actually think it's the opposite. Hear me out for a second. Now, I don't dismiss this. I think this is an example of not good storytelling. But I think the problem is Starlight was much more personal for Twilight. Twilight and Starlight had far more personal interactions and were far more connected, and thus Twilight is more willing to forgive Starlight because of the fact that she reached out to her so directly and contested with her so directly and so individually. Not only back in when Starlight first showed up, when you remember how Twilight was like, "This is about friendship," and Starlight shut her down and all that. But here in the more modern stuff, it's also worth noting that she was the one who personally was being attacked by Starlight. Starlight was sequencing out just her for her revenge, and it was Twilight who was able to turn that around on her too. And I don't disagree, Weods, but I do like Starlight. I know we're in disagreement on that one, but I don't disagree that they're trying to push one person down to push another person up. It is a form of Worf effect, and it's really common in fiction. So, that being said, I do have to point out one thing. Speaking not only as a friend, but a brother and an uncle, there's a sort of protectiveness if someone who you care about decides to start hanging out with, or going out with, or whatever, someone that you wouldn't really approve of. Because that is effectively Twilight's position here. At least at this moment. This will become worse in an upcoming scene. But in this scene, I can kind of see Twilight's perspective. She is like... And yeah, exactly. Like there's a legitimacy to that, because not only are you not sure about this, but you have a legitimate reason to believe that this might lead to this person being a bad influence, which Trixie arguably is a bad influence, but also the worry that they might go into bad behavior directly. Let me use a real-life parallel. Let's say your friend, or student, or brother, or girlfriend, or whatever, is someone who is a former alcoholic who decides to start hanging out with another former alcoholic. No other information supplied. Now, on the one hand, those two people could support each other and be stronger for it. But on the other hand, one could drag the other back down. I have seen that happen, actually, where one former alcoholic has dragged down another former alcoholic by virtue of the fact that, right? One falls and pulls the other with them, metaphorically. So you can kind of see Twilight's perspective here. And I keep emphasizing that point, because in that initial scene, in that first scene where Trixie's introduced to Twilight, I'm kind of with Twilight. At the very least, I understand her perspective. Yeah, because, yeah, exactly, Darth Mordora. This is presuming the worst rather than hoping for the best. And there's valid reasons to do that. They're not necessarily right reasons, but they're not necessarily wrong either. Now, Trixie and Starlight do have a decent dynamic. The two play off each other well, and there's some good chemistry there. Probably the best moments of the episode are the two characters just playing off of each other. I will say that there's another character who I think actually hits it off with Starlight even better in the future. We're not there yet. I just wanted to comment on that briefly because it occurred to me. But regardless, the two play off each other well. There's some good scenes. And then, at about 11 minutes into the episode, I jotted it down, then the episode finally starts to actually lose me. Because this is when Twilight is hanging out in a frickin' bush. This is when they push it a little bit too far, or when Twilight pushes it a little bit too far. Now, Twilight, this is a dumb scene. This, even if the rest of the episode was a purple, which it's not, this one scene would absolutely drag it down to red, because this is a dumb scene. Twilight is shenanigansy in a stupid way, which isn't entertaining or funny, is called out for it by Starlight, and then in the immediate wake of being called out by it, does it again for a cheap gag. This is not only monstrously out of character, which is Idiot Ball in a nutshell, this actually is against the overall theme and approach of the episode, and indeed the entire season. You'll notice that in the middle of this otherwise aggravating scene, there is a very valid, excellent character point for Starlight. Did you catch it? I wouldn't be surprised if you didn't, because you might be drowning in the stupidity the entire time. The character point is Starlight is seeing Twilight clearly not trusting Trixie. Why is that relevant? Well, Twilight says she's forgiven Trixie, and Twilight says she's forgiven Starlight, but she now sees, through actual action, how Twilight is acting to the other person. And what does that mean for her? And you'll notice she takes that pretty hard. It's subtle. But there's this moment where Starlight is just... and she just kind of withdraws. And her voice actress is just noticeably different after that she realizes it. And just... oh. And yeah, remember that Trixie is not forgiven, but Starlight, Anna, Alice forgiven. So this makes the guilt thing even worse. So that cycle's just gotten worse in the background there. And now Starlight is even more emotionally and mentally distraught over this thing. And she immediately runs to Trixie. And this leads to an excellent scene between Starlight and Trixie. Because, first of all, you know, we see Starlight use her magic and the obvious usages of magic in magic trick shows. And there's some cool world-building stuff that I'm just going to kind of gloss over because we've actually already talked about it. But the cool part here is that, and again, credit to, I think it's Kathleen Barr, the actress who plays Trixie, does a good job with her. She's effectively portraying two characters here. On the one hand, she's, I want revenge. On the other hand, she's actually got a friend. And you can tell, just watching her, just paying attention to her expression, wonderful animation as usual, and her voice acting, how she kind of shifts back and forth between those two things. Like, periodically she's just like, yes, and this, and we'll do this. And then you actually want to help. Okay, that's kind of cool. I like that. And then she'll go back to it. Now, she's actually much more obvious about it later when she tries to guilt trip the already extremely guilt-ridden Starlight into going to her show instead of going to the dinner. That's the obvious moment. That's the telling as well as showing that this show loves to do, as I've mentioned many times before. But even before that very obvious overt presentation, you can tell that she is legitimately touched by Starlight's friendship and actually does connect with her. And you can also tell she doesn't really know how to deal with that. It's actually probably part of her character that the way she deals with that is by turning it into a thing. She almost says this flat out later. I just got caught in the moment. This then leads to the second worst scene of the episode. How long have Twilight and Celestia known each other? And been friends? Like, we're at the point now where they're no longer just a student and a mentor. They've actually been friends for some time now. And yet, the way the scene is shot and framed and read between and Twilight, don't worry, it'll be there any minute now, is straight up I Love Lucy. And not in a good way. It's... I don't even know what to say about this. It's like, Cranky Doodle has hairy nose. Isn't that... What? This, I could sit down and process and really chop up this stupid scene and mention how incredibly stupid this scene is. Please forgive me for not actually doing that. Screw this scene. Moving on. Because, yeah, Celestia comes across as a complete stranger. This scene would have actually worked a little bit. It still would have been cringy, but it would have at least worked if it wasn't Celestia, but it was some foreign dignitary. That is how it's portrayed. That is how it's shown. This is the boss coming over for dinner, but oh no, Lucy, you accidentally burned the toast. Or WandaVision, except that show does its own thing, and I don't want to talk about that. But right? Instead, it's just, how do you get your main to do that? Anyways, why doesn't Cadence and Twilight's main go like that? Did they ever explain that? Anyways. Dumb scene. Moving on. This then leads to a really, probably the most impressive animation in the entire show. It's a bit where Twilight, it's such a minor thing, and again, forgive me for gushing about this, but I've been getting into animation lately. There's this bit where Twilight is back here, and she's moving forward at an angle. I'm doing it wrong. She's coming like at this kind of an angle right here. I'm still doing it wrong. There we go. Right about there. It's coming towards the camera, down and to the right. And in so doing, the lighting has to change while she's moving. And the size on her visual has to change, while at the same time the camera is slightly adjusting for the new positioning. It is a really minor thing. It probably took them longer than half the rest of the episode just to work on that one scene. And I wanted to pause to gush about that for a second. Anyways. This then leads to... So Trixie blurts it out. This is actually a really good scene in my opinion. Probably the best scene in the episode. Because the animation absolutely sells the emotions on display here. Twilight is angry. And then Trixie is... Starlight is upset. Trixie is... I've won. You know, she's gloating. But then she realizes as she's doing it that she doesn't really mean it that way. Again, she was just kind of at the moment. And so she says something she doesn't really mean, but at the same time she kind of does. Because she is a flawed person. Trixie is not the good guy here. But then Starlight, who is literally in tears. Remember, again, everything I've talked about with regards to Starlight in this whole episode, and the previous 3 times it's come up. Imagine being in that mindset of all of that guilt and all of that hesitation, all that fear, and all that I haven't been forgiven, everything Sierra Mike said earlier, was a good quote. All of that, and then the one person she thought she actually connected with, oh no, she was just with you to get at someone else. Ouch. What Trixie does to her here is actually worse than what happened to her when she was a foal, the thing that led to her villainous path. Now, if they wanted her to be a villain again, this is the time to do it, right here. I'm just saying. Yeah, the universe proved her right. Congrats! You really aren't that good of a friend. Nobody really does like you. And nobody really has forgiven you. Not even the one person you thought you actually connected with. Sorry. Now, Trixie... Once again, Trixie... Yeah, Trixie has no idea how to process any of this. And you could tell how she's just kind of fumbling through it because she is in such ignorance here. Like, she's completely out of her element. Because she does legitimately connect with Starlight, but doesn't know how to deal with that. And again, she was kind of walking into this with a villainous motive. and the regret and just and then and finally Twilight's actually really awesome, because Twilight comes out there and is that kind of justified angry, right? Like that self-righteous anger. And Trixie's response makes Twilight go, what? Because Twilight wasn't expecting that. Trixie, and again, Trixie doesn't even know how to present this. I'm not upset at all. I'm totally okay with the fact that I want to be alone, and I'm totally okay with going and losing the one friend I ever had. Now if you'll excuse me, I have a magic show to do. And Twilight's just like, because she wasn't expecting that at all. Yeah, Twilight thought this was just a plan for revenge, not that there was anything legitimate here. This then leads to the magic show and her nearly dying, and the writer, I forget which one, someone, I saw a quote about this, actually had to come out and publicly say, no, this isn't a suicide attempt. I roll to disbelieve, because this is totally a suicide attempt. I don't care what the frickin' author says. You just shot yourself into a manticore with no way of getting out of it. Anyways. Yeah, this is a total death of the author situation as far as I'm concerned. Because there's only two ways to take this from what's presented on the screen, in my opinion. One, she's trying to be manipulative and try to force Starlight to be her friend again. I don't think that, but it is a valid perspective. Or two, I don't think this is a deliberate suicide. So, forgive me, because I've studied suicide a lot, because, I mean, I've got the scars to show. She, there's a mentality, when you're not actively trying to kill yourself, you're just not trying to stay alive. It's hard to explain. It's the kind of thing where you're not paying attention because you're so gobstopped that you accidentally don't look both ways when you're crossing the street, or you don't really pay attention when you're chopping the vegetables, or whatever. It's something like that, right? Because what's happening in that moment is you are so mentally and emotionally blank. Your normal survival instinct isn't there. You're just kind of there. And you just kind of accept what's happening. And yeah, it is self-destructive. That is what I think she's in. That's the state, I think. That she is so emotionally gobsmacked right now that she is just kind of existing and going through because momentum, because that's what we do. When we don't know what to do, when we are emotionally destroyed, we keep doing the normal things like doing the dishes or going to work the next day or getting in the car to drive to pick up milk. It's normal, it's momentum. It's what we usually do. So she just kind of keeps going through with it. Now, the reason I point that out that way is because you'll notice that the Manticore doesn't chew. I know this is a minor point to hinge my entire theory on, but the Manticore also bows at the end of the thing. The Manticore was obviously in on the trick, which means the Manticore wasn't going to chew, because he didn't, which means the Manticore wasn't trying to kill her. So there's a pretty good chance she would have actually lived, even if she had gone in, because the Manticore would have just been like, and then waited for the trick to happen and be like, and then they would have figured something out. Oh yeah, why is Fluttershy scared of the Manticore? She's not. She's scared of the chains. I'm serious, I looked it up. In short, this is not a particularly well scene. They could have done this scene a little bit better, but the long and the short of it is, that is my take, is that she is in a self-destructive, emotionally dead state. It's almost like, Nova Knight is right there. First of all, thank you, Nova Knight. That is the actual, very much appreciate Nova Knight. That is the author answer, yes, she is scared of the chains. But sorry, I'm getting way off topic. That is my interpretation of what's going on with Trixie at the end there. Give me one moment. I'm sorry to pause this. I have to look up what Shadow of New York is. See if it's already on the list. There it is. It is already on the list. Okay, just making sure. Didn't recognize the name of it. The Pate and Growlerful Trisky. God, I can't even say that. You wanted me to put half of 15. Okay, we'll put 7 on one and 8 on another. How's that sound? Shadows of New York. And Hades. Thank you again, Nova Knight, very, very much. As always, much obliged. Then the episode ends. How do you get your hair to do that all the time? The reason... I said this at the very beginning. This is a hard episode to talk about because it does some things so right. And then there's the rest of it. I have to admit, I completely empathize with Starlight in this one. And you can completely see where Trixie's coming from. And even Twilight does have some good scenes. It's just there's the two really big scenes in the middle that absolutely drag it down. I'm reminded of the Brotherhood of Social, which was actually a pretty decent episode, except for the middle. You know? Having said all that, rating this is going to be interesting. This is by Nick Confalone, who did Party Pooped and Hearthbreakers, 2 average episodes. I'm willing to push this one up to above average, even despite its issues, because this would probably be a purple for me, if not for its issues. This has that extra oomph, that extra emotional power to it, and it is a great character study for 2 characters. It's just, it is shoved down by the aggravation and the stupid parts. My opinion. It is an above average episode, I think, overall, absolutely. I'm willing to stand by that. So, let's... Yeah, there was some... great lighting stuff in this episode. So I need to get on... Orange is above average act. I need to get on with Streaming Syndicate because we need to finish that goddamn game. So I'm going to chop off the local recording.